and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And on the show this week, Attorney General William Barr, head of the Justice Department, gave a really alarming anti-LGBT speech this week.
He gets worse every minute, and it's only because there's so much noise around him that we aren't just losing our minds over him.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Democratic candidates weighed in on LGBT rights and religious freedom, among other things, on both the CNN and HRC forums.
We're going to tell you about two track stars who sprinted out of the closet this week.
And the man who blew the lid off of Hollywood's closet has died at the age of 96.
In Uganda, gay activist Brian Wasswa, 28 years old, was brutally killed in his own home.
In Australia, the Anglican, I first wrote this in my notes as Catholic, and then I had to read it twice and realize, no, it's the Anglican Archbishop, has told same-sex marriage supporters to leave the church.
The Catholic Archbishop is in prison for child molestation.
Oh, that's great.
I'm going to review a hilarious new play about coping with addiction.
And as the NewFest LGBTQ Film Festival opens here in New York next week, we have one of the filmmakers as our guest, Alexis Clements, who has made a wonderful new documentary about lesbian spaces, those that have disappeared and those that have survived and are thriving.
So this was the week of the Values Voters Summit, and Trump started that off by saying his opponents are trying to hound Christians from jobs, the public square, and indoctrinate our kids. But he was done one better by our Attorney General, William Barr, speaking at Notre Dame.
Please.
Well, William Barr gets up there and starts railing against the New Jersey law requiring integration of LGBT issues in schools. And here's what he said. It's inconsistent with traditional Christian teaching, talking about gay people. Anyway, the Bible does, of course, call for the death penalty for homosexuality. So he also said Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian for human conduct.
He's not the first to say that.
He said secularists are running a campaign to destroy the traditional moral order. Well, you know, we'd like to shake things up so we can survive in this society.
This guy's going to make a great next pope.
Well, you know, people said that, he was an institutionalist. He was the former attorney general under Bush, blah, 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 blah. Vanity Fair did a piece on him and his father, who was a Jewish convert to Catholicism.
And ran the Dalton. He was the headmaster at Dalton.
Where he hired Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
But he...
child molester.
This guy, William Barr, has been a reactionary from childhood. He was very scary. He had this mysterious meeting with Rupert Murdoch this week, which also scares me.
Yes, what was that all about?
Well, I think it's about getting them ready for the investigations they're doing. Trump spoke about it today. We're taping on Wednesday, where he said, we're going to get a lot of surprises. I think maybe about Obama. We're doing investigations.
That's right. They're still investigating Hillary's emails. This is what the Justice Department has turned into. You thought the Justice Department may have had a few problems over the years. Nothing compared to this. Right. We think Trump is an unbelievable travesty who we cannot imagine, even at this point, as President of the United States. Barr is that cubed.
Yes. Well, read the Vanity Fair article, and you can read about his daddy issues.
He also talked about how he supports the Catholic schools that have fired married same-sex teachers. He thinks that's just dandy. And what he says about these curricula in New Jersey, Illinois, and California now is he's very against them because they don't have opt-out options for parents to drag their kids out of these
No
classes.
one should have to hear about homosexuality.
No one should have an actual, honest, factual
it's just outrageous.
health class, sex education class. You know, when are we going to wake up in this country and realize how important this kind of teaching, how fundamentally important this kind of teaching? When are we going to teach kids in school how to live, how to do their finances, how to think about their peers, how to...
I read this week that in Japanese schools...
Throw out the math classes. I don't care.
Yes, I read that in Japanese schools, I didn't know this, that they spend the first about 3-4 years just working on manners, getting along with each other, learning how to relate to each other before they get into all these subjects.
The Korean sex slaves might have something to say about that, but...
Well, yes, I'm not. I'm
may
talking
take
about
it
the
a little
modern
far.
Japanese system.
Good. Well, I'm in favor of teaching human beings how to get along with each other because it's not working yet.
Well, and then there are, curveballs that are thrown from the courts with the right-wing judges. In the Northern District of Texas, they go to this judge all the time. He overturned the Affordable Care Act regulations that prohibit insurers and providers from denying treatment or coverage or treatment on the basis of sex, gender identity, or termination of pregnancy. It stops medically necessary transgender health services.
Well, the Trump administration's been doing that on its own anyway. They don't even need a judge to outlaw that stuff. And speaking of courts, this whole thing with the Supreme Court and the sexual orientation and gender identity cases, it was just so clear that they have no idea who we are or how to talk about us. And I'm including the progressive judges in that. Yeah. It was just a mess. And
even Sotomayor.
Sotomayor is the one who brought up the whole trans bathroom question. And there's been some interesting commentary since then from members of the trans community about the arguments made by our side, specifically in the trans case, and the fact that it has been pinned on Amy Stevens, the trans woman who worked at the funeral home, who got fired, for being a trans woman, for transitioning, and that our side's argument rested on the fact that she was perceived as insufficiently masculine, when in fact she should have been seen as insufficiently feminine to the funeral home director, and that we should have described her more consistently as a woman and pinned the firing on the funeral home having seen her as insufficiently feminine, because they wouldn't have fired her if they thought she was a woman, which they did not see her as. So I think there's some interesting analysis going on of the arguments that were made. I'm no more optimistic about our winning those cases.
Well, it's nice to see people like Pompeo. Well, then, do we do Pompeo's speech? No,
please.
He's your Secretary of State. I think he wants to run for Senate from Kansas, but of course he's tied up in this whole Ukraine thing. But he gave a speech to the American Association of Christian Counselors and posted it on the website of the State Department, his theme being a Christian leader. He's supposed to lead the United States, policy here. This is very scary stuff.
He has been talking like this for many, many years when he was a congressman from Kansas. And this has been his whole thing, and this has been his blast against us for many years. He's all about this fundamentalist Christianity.
And at least, Trump is freeing up ISIS to murder us once again.
Meanwhile, the Democratic candidates in the debates, I guess, actually the LGBTQ forum took place after we taped last week, so we should talk about that.
This was so unprecedented in the sense that each candidate got a half hour with a
CNN
host from CNN, and then the audience was all LGBT people and allies who were asking the questions. And so they had 9 hours, 9 of these 9 hours of this.
No, 4.5 hours.
Oh, all right, okay.
Half an hour each for 9 candidates.
Sorry, math, do the math.
Yeah, maybe we'll reinstitute the math education.
Okay.
But they were, they were fine. They all had the right rhetoric, but they got a little off course here and there. Beto O'Rourke took the most heat for getting a little over his skis, as they say, on the question of religions and religious schools that discriminate against LGBTQ people.
That's not what the question was. The question was, should a religious organization lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage? And he just said yes. Absolutely.
Which was wrong.
It's ridiculous.
It's stupid.
We're not calling for that. Would you?
No.
You're getting us in trouble.
Exactly, he is, and he doubled down on it in the ensuing week. It is an absolute misread of what the law should be. Yes. Our understanding of it, it's crazy.
They have a very unsophisticated notion of religious freedom and what a religious exemption is. I speak as a former city human rights commissioner. There is a religious exemption in every human rights law, a limited one, and it's you're only supposed to invoke the ministerial exception. You're not supposed to have to compromise the practice of your religion. In other words, simple example, the Catholic Church doesn't have to ordain women even though sex discrimination is illegal. But if they engage in sexual harassment, they can be subject to the civil law.
And they don't have to hire LGBTQ ministers, even in a state that has a non-discrimination law that protects sexual orientation.
And even though they couldn't get along without gay people in the priesthood.
They don't have to openly hire us as ministers in that ministerial religious position, but they cannot discriminate against us in hiring janitors. And then there's a murky gray area in the middle, which we've been litigating for some years now, about where you draw the line
English
between
teachers, counselors, and
chef. Remember the chef at the Milton, Mass. Catholic school?
And some of them have sued, and some of them have sued successfully.
Choir directors have become the subject of litigation, but that's
organists, and there are nothing but gay organists.
Pretty much,
according to Ned Rorem.
And that is where you have the argument and the discussion.
So that's embarrassing.
It is, and
Trump attacked him, and Buttigieg took him on afterwards and said, "No, I don't support that way of looking at it."
But still, none of them really explained it in this way and this clearly, and made the point.
They don't think about it.
Well, they don't, because they don't know us. They don't understand our issues, and even Buttigieg.
And that was part of the problem with these forums, these 9 half-hour forums, in that they were falling all over themselves to be liked, to ingratiate themselves with us. Biden, in fact, gets up and says, "Well, look, we all agree on these things, so it's really not going to be an issue."
Yeah, it's not like, the gay bathhouses and around-the-clock sex. Please, come on. You think you're doing us a favor? Leave us alone. In fact, have an LGBTQ rights forum without mentioning us. That would be a big help.
Well, but there were some interesting moments. I mean, Gavin Grimm got to ask a question of Cory Booker.
Yeah, that was sweet.
Judy Shepard got to ask a question of her friend Joe Biden.
But the more interesting moments were the black trans activists who showed up and interrupted and took the mic. And then my favorite moment was the one who was scheduled to ask a question, got up and asked it, and was introduced as Shay Diamond. And she says, "It's Shia. And when you mispronounce a trans person's name, that is a violent act." Well, so then I thought, whoa, I'm looking her up. And her name is spelled S-H-E-A.
Yeah.
Shay. In most iterations. But I thought, well, maybe it is Shia, and she told them that beforehand, and then they screwed it up.
When they named Shea Stadium years ago, I used to pronounce it Shia when I first saw it.
Just for fun, or just?
No, because I thought I just saw the word. How old was I? 9, 8?
I don't know. And the other thing was Elizabeth Warren, and thinking she was so clever on the marriage answer.
Well, and I'm going to argue that she was. She's getting heat for this, so she gets asked by by the chair of the board, Morgan Cox of the Human Rights Campaign. So if a person of faith comes to you and
a supporter.
A person of faith comes to you and says, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, what do you say to them? And she says, well, first of all, I'm assuming it's a guy, and I would say, then marry one woman. And then she pauses and she goes, if you can find one. And, you know, and it got a big laugh. And so, all right, so she's getting a lot of heat for this. Oh, Marco Rubio took great umbrage at this.
Well, because they're saying that she is implying that anyone who has that attitude is an incel, is a guy who cannot, who's not a regular guy.
Stay in the moment, though. The credit she's getting for it is she said what popped into her head, and something Hillary Clinton would never do.
Popped into her head. Robin Tyler wrote me a note saying that was an old joke of hers, and someone told it to Elizabeth.
The joke popped into her head, and she told it, and she didn't hold back, and it got a great reaction in the hall.
Yes.
And so I was less. I thought that, and it was the viral moment.
And certainly,
people like authenticity.
I don't think it offended anyone who agrees with us and who is a potential Warren supporter. I think the people offended were the people who hated her already. Just as with Trump, he offends us, but he doesn't offend his own supporters.
I thought it was very sweet, the young trans boys coming out with their moms and asking questions.
That was adorable.
And one of them asked Elizabeth Warren about the Secretary of Education, who's very prejudicial now, and she said, I'm going to clear my choice with you. And I thought that was terrific.
And I thought it was actually my favorite moment was the Saturday Night Live cold open takeoff on it with Billy Porter as the MC. Now, if Billy Porter actually emceed these things, it would be far, far better.
It would be a lot more fun.
Yes.
Now, Kamala Harris started out by coming out and saying, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and Chris Cuomo says, mine too. And that was a joke.
Really, Chris?
Well, he apologized afterwards, but it was
way afterwards.
She said she'd appoint a trans cabinet member. Did I get that right?
I should hope so. I hope they all would.
So
what if they had an all-trans cabinet? That would be interesting.
Well, we're all on a spectrum, and I don't mean that facetiously.
Yes.
Let's see.
But that, and then the debate last night, as we're taping, of the 12 Democratic candidates. It just seemed like a big waste of time, and I am not a Cory Booker supporter.
Right.
But I thought he, by distancing himself, at least was on the right track. I would like to see them stand up there and say, look, we can discuss all these issues, and we all have just nuanced differences. But the real issue is, who do you trust to be president of the United States, and who is going to connect with you as a human being best? And that is my goal, and that is what I'm committed to doing.
So what do we have? The guy from the New York Times, but are you going to raise taxes, yes or no? And these are right-wing talking points. And I don't like the way Buttigieg went after, I liked him on other things, but I don't like the way he went after Warren, attacking her plan using right-wing talking points about how it's going to cost trillions of dollars.
It's all a strategy on his part to be more forceful, to get more polling points, to boost himself in the polls.
I am going to make you forget I'm gay.
Well, he certainly didn't mention it. But the one who annoyed me the most was Anderson Cooper.
Yes.
Enough, we're done. Thank you, we're moving on. Shut up.
And we're going to ask you about, I don't know if they can maybe pull up this picture. He brought Ellen into it. Ellen DeGeneres is friends with George W. Bush.
And here, Governor Abbott of Texas.
A vicious anti-gay bigot in Texas, passing anti-gay laws.
Yep.
Chomping down on Chick-fil-A to stick it to us in front of everybody. And she's palling it up with him as well. But, and you name somebody who, you're enemies with, but you talk to. Oh, God.
Well, a lot of them rejected the premise of the question and the idea that they were being asked that question
John McCain, but he wanted to take his dead.
Ted Cruz.
He can't defend himself.
I mean, really. Couldn't you come up with a better ending question than that?
Well, the whole thing. I mean, the moderators, here's the thing. These are television shows.
Yes.
And they just want to get some sound bites for their ongoing television show, which to watch. It's not.
All sides. The press wants that. The candidates want that.
It's not useful.
Well, I feel pretty good about Shep Smith throwing up his hands and saying, "The hell with all of you! I'm walking away."
Shep Smith, the out-gay reporter at I didn't realize
Fox.
he was making like $15 million, but well, he is, and he's got a good contract there that he.
We're not making $15 million, but if Fox wants to hire us, as is, we'd consider it.
Okay.
So we've been on Fox.
We were on. Bill O'Reilly had a show.
Look what happened to him.
Prime time.
And where is he now?
He was very nasty to Ann.
But congratulations to, well, I wasn't very nice to him.
Well, you called him an ignorant bigot. You were right.
I did. And I would do it again. But Shep, you want to come guest host here? It probably wouldn't violate the terms of your exit agreement.
Yeah.
But congratulations. We appreciate what you did.
Okay.
All right. Let's move off politics and onto some sad stories of some more violent acts.
These are real issues in
Houston.
Yep.
Italy Marlowe, a black trans woman, 29 years old, shot dead in her driveway at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
By a 23-year-old suspect who has fled, who apparently lived with her.
It's really, these things used to happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now they happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the slaughter of black trans women continues.
And then there's the story of the trans actress and comedian who was referenced by Dave Chappelle in his transphobic Netflix special, although she apparently laughed at the jokes, but who knows?
Well,
she's taken her own life.
Don't we all sometimes laugh at the jokes when just to look like we're getting along and good sports?
It's Daphne Dorman of San Francisco. She
activist, comedian.
She said she left a note saying she was sorry. Please take care of my little daughter.
She left, young daughter. That's
sad.
That's what I feel sad about.
Look, we have created a society from the top on down of hostility towards trans folks, and that's why we're trying to fight here and elsewhere.
And in Philadelphia, a trans man was attacked. He had just been to Philadelphia Pride Fest. He was wearing a sweatshirt that said "Trans Lives Matters." He was in a convenience store, and two guys jumped him and beat him viciously.
Gave him a broken jaw, kicked him in the head. No one came to his aid.
Yep.
And by the way, it's actually called the Outfest here in Philadelphia.
I read it as Pride Fest.
It is a Pride thing, yes.
All right, well, that's that for violence stories this week.
Also, unfortunate news sort of a positive, negative story. In Jacksonville, Florida, a gay couple was denied services from a photographer there for their wedding. They were inundated with offers from other companies to shoot their wedding for free. And some people posted, "Oh, isn't this the great solution to this problem? Just go elsewhere." And maybe in Jacksonville, you're going to get some other offers. What if you're in the middle of nowhere and that's the only sole service provider of medical services and you're being denied?
So many small towns around America. All right, a couple of nice stories, coming out stories.
Yeah.
Karen Clement. Where is Karen from? I don't think I have that.
33 years old, two-time Olympic gold medalist in track and field.
And a silver in 2008 and 2016. He is Trinidadian American. There he is. There he is with his American flag at the Olympics.
Here's his quote. He says, "As I've gotten older," he's 33. He used to be 34 later this month, I think. "I started caring less and less, and now in my 30s, I thought it's time to finally be free." So there he is.
And some of this is tied to National Coming Out Day, including the coming out video made by Noah Green, also a track star at USC, the University of Southern California. He made a video for National Coming Out Day, and we thought it was so charming that a viewer sent it to us, so we're going to show it to you.
Hi, my name is Noah Green, and I'm on USC Athletics for track and field, and I'm a hurdler. I actually knew that I was gay going into the 8th grade, so when I was around 15 or 16. And there was only 3 people that I told. It was my younger sister, my older brother, and one of my cousins. And the only one's opinion that really solidified how I would act after that was my older brother's, and he kind of was not really supportive at that time just because of the basic stereotypes and stigmas around being a gay man, especially being a gay black man that is an athlete. So it was kind of like a hit to my identity, and so I kind of put up a straight front for the next couple of years until I was really fully able to understand like who I was as a person. Going into my senior year, I came out to my parents and my siblings, and they full-heartedly supported me. But it just goes to show that me being a person has nothing to do with my sexual preference as part of my identity. I would say I know how difficult it is on coming out as gay or bi or transgender or whatever orientation you want to be, but there are people out there that support you and will support you 100%. I'm definitely an advocate that you can be who you want to be, and if anybody doesn't agree with that, like, they can agree to disagree, but it's part of your identity, but it doesn't make up your whole identity. I know at USC I've made some amazing friends that support me all the way, and just being able to have that support system makes you more confident over the years, and it'll become a thing where it's like, oh yeah, like, I'm gay, but it doesn't have any significance to anybody else because it's just a sexual preference.
Terrific.
Congratulations and thank you. And another Pride event coming up next weekend, October 24th through 26th, Savannah, Georgia. They're holding their 20th Pride event, but their first parade. And it sounds like an amazing event they're putting together. The parade includes a costume contest. So if you're near Savannah, Georgia, you might want to check that out.
Have fun. Some other people who passed this week. Scotty Bowers, you've heard of him, 96 years old. He's the guy who blew the lid off Hollywood's closet in that tell-all book, and about how he arranged same-sex liaisons from everyone from Cary Grant and Walter Pidgeon to Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, who, by the way, never slept with each other. He himself was bisexual and really a fun guy.
The book is Full Service, My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secret Sex Lives of the Stars.
Isn't the movie on Netflix?
Probably. It's a documentary made by Matt Turnauer, who just made the Roy Cohn documentary. The movie is Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood. It's pretty darn good, and you might want to check that out.
Right. Half of Hollywood turns out to be gay or bisexual. Anyway,
only half.
In Kentucky, a beloved drag queen, Carmela Marcella Garcia, has died, also known as George Timothy Reed, 57. The Grand Old Gal of the South is the title. Performed all over the country and was a big fundraiser for health charities.
And a pageant coach for women competing in the Miss America pageant. Successfully, by the way. All right, and congratulations to Ronan Farrow. He's been with John Lovett, the Obama speechwriter and joke writer, for some time, but they have now announced that they are engaged to be married.
Yes, John.
We just want everyone to be happy.
It's quite a week for Ronan.
Yes.
He's been all over the news with his book, Catch and Kill.
Yeah.
By the way, Susan Collins up in Maine, new poll has her support at her approval rating at 35%, and a generic Democrat is beating her 44 to 41% right now.
Yeah, but then when you get the real Democrat.
I know.
I have a question for you. This new organization, Accountable for Equality, it's a group of activists and donors who are out to unmask things like the National Christian Foundation, which is a huge funder of all the right-wing organizations like Focus on the Family. So I'm looking at their website, Accountable for Equality, and I'm looking for who's involved with this. No names. And I contact the one name I have with the PR guy. I said, so who are these activists and donors? He says, oh, they prefer to remain anonymous. They're scared. I said, it's called Accountable for Equality. You might want to be transparent. Your whole thing is you're revealing the National Christian Foundation. How about being upfront about who you are?
Well, that art teacher in Arizona is upfront at the Chandler Unified School District. This woman was fired for freely discussing her Christian anti-gay bigotry, saying gay people are just confused. She brought a box of Bibles to class, and she discriminated against a trans student. She rejected the art project of the trans student, said, I'm going to give you a 0 out of 50 because you're offending my Christian sensibilities.
Oh, no.
And, well, she got fired.
Oh, good.
Let's see if Alliance Defending Freedom picks up that case.
I'm sure they will, because it's a fundraiser for them.
Now, the Catholic bishops aren't afraid. They want the Supreme Court to rule that sex is an immutable characteristic and should not be redefined to include sexual inclinations or conduct. Now, the court has already ruled in 2003 that our conduct is already protected. Of course, the bishops don't believe in, banning traditional sex discrimination.
You can call it immutable, but we'll tell you what is immutable.
Yeah.
You know?
And of course, so many Catholic bishops enjoy it.
Congratulations to activists in Nashville, Tennessee. The LGBT Chamber of Commerce there had as one of its members something called Core Civic, I think. Yes, which is a private prison manager. And they paid their dues, and they were members of the LGBT organization. And activists said, wait a minute, private prisons, they're the ones that are killing trans women in prison and abusing immigrants and doing all this stuff. Well, how can they be members of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce? And the Chamber of Commerce said, I don't know what you're talking about. They gave us their money, they support us. What's your problem? But their error was pointed out to them, and they have returned the money, and they have rejected Core Civic.
All right.
And that was mostly trans activists in Tennessee affecting that.
Right.
Thank you. Congratulations. Right. Moving on to international news.
Well, we told you about that actress in England who was supposed to be in The Color Purple, but she was anti-gay, and they fired her. They didn't want to let her play a lesbian role because she was. So Alice Walker wrote an open letter trying to, set her straight and said, I don't want somebody who doesn't support the values of this to be playing this role.
Oh, okay.
It's a long, you can look it up on
All right. Several stories out of Uganda.
Yeah.
First of all, an activist, a 28-year-old activist, Brian Wasswa, has been murdered at home. There are friends and family carrying his coffin.
He worked for, gay-related NGOs, AIDS-related NGOs. He was just 28 years old.
A great guy, beloved.
He was openly gay and gender non-conforming.
But people
sometimes described himself as transgender. Human Rights Watch says that 3 other LGBT people have been killed in recent months there. So this is all at the time that they're reintroducing the Kill the Gays bill.
But they're not.
Well, I know. I'm just going to get to that. One of the ministers announced, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, well, that was one minister, and then the whole world came down on them and said, what are you talking about?
So President Museveni, no friend of ours, said, oh, no, we have no intention. We've already got, they've already got a criminal penalty.
We have enough penalties.
We don't need the death penalty.
Yeah. And then there's some jerk who appears to be in Uganda who's putting out some advertisement for an app that's supposed to be able to evaluate how gay you are, and it's all a scam, and don't fall for that. And Uganda is a hotbed of mess these days.
We have a lot of stories from Brazil as well.
Okay, well, the good news from Brazil is that the European Parliament has nominated a few people for the Sakharov Prize, which is for extraordinary human rights work. And one of them is the late Marielle Franco, who was a Brazilian legislator, out lesbian, and is the first LGBT person on the short list for the Sakharov Prize.
Yes.
She was just miraculous. And also miraculous was Jean Willis, also a Brazilian activist and member of the Congress there, who fled the country, and he has taken his name off the list of potential awardees of the prize to make way for other Brazilian heroes.
Yes, and then there are developments in the case of Marielle Franco, police have lost the footage that could confirm the identity of the killers, but we have a picture of a second suspect in the case, photographed with Bolsonaro, who's the president, because it was his gang or his son's gangs that were part of this. Glenn Greenwald said, look, this doesn't mean Bolsonaro was personally involved in the killing, but he's not
going after the killers.
He's very intertwined with these characters.
Yeah. Good news from Jamaica, where the Supreme Court says that the Montego Bay Pride organization can use the cultural center that the mayor of Montego Bay had denied them, calling it sacred space.
That's Maurice Tomlinson there, who's our
on the right,
buddy.
Great activist for many years.
The mayor is appealing.
Not very, but he is going to appeal the case.
Scotland is going to take the cases of gay and bisexual men who were wrongly convicted under the sexual offenses law and pardon them. They can apply.
Well, they have to apply in some way for paperwork, but it's a more automatic process than in England and Wales, so it's considered a little step forward. In Poland, sorry to see that the right-wing government was reelected on two platforms. Great social programs for the people and hate the gays.
The social programs are things like pensions and welfare and health care and those kinds of things, which Trump isn't providing.
Hell no. But they were relentless in their hate the gays
and it worked.
Campaigning.
Sadly.
Yeah. Thank you once again to Ireland, where our energy secretary, Rick Perry, was visiting.
Iceland.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't read my own handwriting.
Well,
again, to Iceland.
Yeah.
Because they've done this before to Pence.
Yes.
Yes. So Rick Perry was there. He was confronted by the gay environment minister who reamed him one for opposing same-sex marriage in Texas.
Well, Rick, if you need a hug, go to Ellen.
In Denmark, pro ice hockey player Jan Lee Olsen has come out at age 27. One, I think, like the third pro hockey player in the world to come out. Thank you, Jan.
The Anglican Bishop of Sydney, Glenn Davies, he gets up there in the pulpit and he asks for those lobbying for same-sex marriage in the church, please leave. Rather than pushing for reform to satisfy the lusts and pleasures of the world. We cannot bless sin. He accuses them of abandoning the plain teaching of Scripture, like, love your neighbor as yourself.
Well, your attitude has always been that people should leave the church rather than propping it up, even though they hate it.
They're very evangelical over there in the Anglican Church in Sydney. So anyway, and of course, but hey, the Pope canonized Bishop John Henry Newman this week, the theologian of the 19th century, who was, clearly gay, intense emotional relationship with
Who am I to judge?
With another priest, Ambrose St. John, who he called his earthly light. He wanted to be buried with him, but they dug him up and put him somewhere else because he was up for sainthood.
Okay.
Took him away from that guy.
Do you have any more international news?
I think not.
Okay. Any AIDS news?
No.
Well, then why don't we...
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait, I forgot the Hungary story.
Okay.
Well, we told you Coca-Cola did some gay ads in Hungary. Sweet. But the local Pest Consumer Protection Department fined them $2,000 for undermining adolescent moral development with these ads.
Oh my, just these poor corporations, they step up to help us and then they get fined in Hungary.
Right.
All right, let's move on to entertainment news and our special guest this week.
So, Jamie Lee Curtis is set to film the story of an Oklahoma woman who stands in for absent moms at gay weddings. Your mother won't go, Sarah Cunningham will go. She wrote a memoir about that. Jamie Lee Curtis liked it. She's going to make a movie about it. And
she spent 3 days with the family and decided to make the movie.
She runs a nonprofit, this woman, called Free Mom Hugs. All right.
Okay, that's good. And I'm actually more interested in the fact that Billy Porter is going to play the fairy godmother in a new movie of Cinderella, which is going to star Camila Cabello as Cinderella and Idina Menzel as the evil stepmother.
Indeed.
And Billy Porter as the fairy godmother. Major motion picture.
Fasten your seatbelts. I have a play to recommend. It's called The White Chip. at 59 East 59th. It's off-Broadway there in New York. You know, most plays about addiction are very depressing cautionary tales. This is by Sean Daniels, and I think it's a rollicking good time in the theater. Joe Tapper plays the main character, Stephen, who guides us through his unhealthy relationship with alcohol, from his Jack Mormon childhood to his atheist and creative adulthood, and how it affects his family, friends, and colleagues, all played by the other two actors, who are both terrific. I thought it was endlessly entertaining, hilarious, insightful. It really helped me understand addiction more and how people get over it.
I was going to say you're how old, but you have a birthday this weekend. No. Happy birthday, Andy.
Thank you, Anne. Anyway, it also has a very moving conclusion, but it's really one of the best shows I've seen this season. It's on only until October 26th.
The white chip.
It demands, do you know what the white chip is?
Yes.
Okay. It's what they hand you at AA meetings when you first come in, and this guy had a stack of them. All right, the other one is Slave Play. We didn't like it off-Broadway.
Did not at all.
Tried to give it a chance on Broadway. Got lots of good notices from mainstream critics, hailing Jeremy O'Harris as a brave new voice. But
you tried to give it a chance. I passed for a second look.
It's sort of meant to be a serious satire on therapy groups, but I think that he sort of pulled his punches, makes it too broad. I have something to say. Comedy is serious business, so do it straight and you might succeed.
Well, I'm not against doing it as comedy, but be a little more subtle about it, a little more nuanced. That's what I mean. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean.
Well, and there's the Margaret Mead Film Festival is on this weekend, the 17th through the 20th, at the Museum of Natural History, I guess. Yes, somewhere around there. And there's a movie Saturday night at 8:30, Black Divas, D-I-V-A-Z, from Australia, that's about Indigenous people in a drag competition that is full of very moving personal stories. So if that sounds appealing to you, that's 8:30 Saturday night at the Margaret Mead Film Festival.
All right.
But we're going to talk.
Is that all you've got?
That is. We're going to talk about another film festival that is next weekend here in New York, and that is the annual NewFest LGBTQ Film Festival.
October 23rd to 29th, 160 films from 32 countries. It's the 31st festival. You can go to newfest.org to look it all up.
And it's really a great festival. It has been for years. There are always interesting movies. I've seen some of the smartest, funniest, most moving films anywhere at this festival. So I highly recommend that you check out newfest.org to see if there's anything that catches your eye. But one thing that caught our eye is a film called All We've Got, which is a new documentary about lesbian and queer women's spaces, and those that have disappeared over the years and those that have survived and thrived. And this question of what does survive and how it thrives is an interesting one, and a little more deep and nuanced than just, oh, we've lost all these. So we have the filmmaker here, but we want to start by showing you the trailer for All We've Got.
June is officially Pride Month, and HuffPost Live is doing a series of segments celebrating the queer community. And we all know who the L in LGBTQ stands for. Lesbians, of course, but perhaps not for long.
You're listening to Think Out Loud on OPB. I'm Dave Miller. In 2010, a Portland bar called the Egyptian Room closed its doors, and the city's only bar that catered specifically to lesbians was shuttered for good. Portland is not alone. Lesbian bars and bookstores and spaces of all kinds are closing around the country, from Hollywood to Houston to Philadelphia.
It is a little more challenging being a lesbian bar versus being just an anybody or just mainly gay male bar.
We do constantly face sort of the threat or the pressure of getting squeezed out.
Storms are brewing in Oklahoma. Where are you going? Everybody's heading to Alibis. This place ain't going anywhere.
Lots of different stuff happens here. People eat here. People fight here. People create here, envision and dream. Sometimes people sleep here. People make love here. That feels important.
As we as a group have more integrity, we as individuals can also have more integrity, and we become a lot less breakable than we've been in the past.
I wonder what the city would be like if the Esperanza wasn't here. And I wonder if I would be doing what I was doing, but also if I was, how much more scary that would be for me.
I am a different person within a completely different life had it not been for WOW.
This beautiful structure today inspires us almost as much as its precious contents, because this is the only building ever owned by a lesbian organization in this metropolitan area.
It's the only institution that I know of that continues the values and beliefs that I started working in gay liberation for.
Mm-hmm. And back then it was gay liberation.
That's right. That's right, it was.
Alexis Clements joins us. She is the filmmaker, first-time filmmaker.
First time.
Amazing. And this is a rich film with all sorts of great historical footage and goes around the country to unexpected places like the bar in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. So tell us how this project came about and what it is you accomplish in this.
Well, I'll try to tell the short version of this story because of course there's a long version. I mean, the medium version of the story is that I'd written a play inspired by the Lesbian History Archives,
which is opening this week in Minneapolis.
Which is opening at 20% Theater in Minneapolis tomorrow night, October 17. Called Unknown, and it runs through October 27. But yeah, so I'd written that play entirely cast with queer women and lesbians of many generations, and I knew it would be pretty challenging to get that play produced. So I was looking for community spaces to do readings in. I loved the intimacy of that. I loved the idea of people being able to inhabit these characters who weren't necessarily actors. And so I was like, great, I'm gonna get a pickup truck, because what dyke doesn't want a pickup truck?
I've heard this story so many times from friends.
Right.
I'm gonna get a truck, I'm gonna drive around the country, I'm gonna record people's stories.
Yeah, so I did that, the great queer pilgrimage that many have done before me. But of course, I also knew that these spaces were closing.
Yes.
I knew that very well. And so I knew that I needed to record the trip, and I didn't want to make a film about me or my play. So in fact, I ended up making a film about queer women's spaces around the country. I wanted to also get away from the conversation that tends to focus almost entirely on bars.
Yes.
I really wanted to look at political spaces, art spaces, community spaces that we don't talk about a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, but you didn't neglect bars.
No,
and
absolutely not.
We saw a little glimpse of the Oklahoma City bar Allies, and that was quite charming. They're terrific.
It's a fantastic bar. You know, I ended up going there because I wanted to get away from the coasts. Of course, another part of the conversation is that we tend to talk a lot about New York, a lot about San Francisco and LA. And I can't remember who at the archives I was talking to, and they were like, oh, you've got to go to Oklahoma. There's like 2 or 3 lesbian bars in Oklahoma. At the time, there was no lesbian bar in London, England, not one. And Oklahoma had 3. I was like, okay, I have to go to Oklahoma.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
If you're going to be, Oklahoma, first of all, is a much more sophisticated place than people understand.
Indeed.
But yes, that would be a major form of community, I would think, there.
Absolutely.
So many have closed, but some survive. So let's start with what makes a place survive? What does it take?
Well, that is the central question in the film. So, the answer is in the film, but a couple of the quick answers are, at the very base, as you know, we're in a studio in New York City right now talking. Everybody knows real estate and gentrification are huge challenges in major cities, and even in smaller cities and towns. So the huge problem is gentrification and the financialization of real estate. And the thing people forget is that they know that the spaces themselves struggle paying rent, but they forget that the communities who go to those bars are getting pushed farther and farther out, right? So I like to mention the Lexington Club or the bar in San Francisco that a few people know closed a few years ago. San Francisco people have a very clear sense of gentrification, so it makes a handy example. So that closes, and bars queer bars for women in particular, tend to be very generational, right? Like women in their 20s and 30s tend to go. It's less common, or it's less of the majority of most of the bars. And of course, there are exceptions, there's different communities. But if you have women in their 20s and 30s trying to go to a dyke bar in San Francisco, they don't live in San Francisco. They can't afford to live in San Francisco. They live across the bridge. They live in the Bay Area and farther out. So who's going to drive or take the BART and go all the way to San Francisco for a cheap beer? Certainly they do it. Certainly some do, but not enough to help sustain a bar like that.
So are those bars, just to stay with bars for the moment, are they springing up in those more outer rings?
Generally, it's tough, right? I mean, let's think about New York City. In New York City, you have the central areas of Manhattan where we still have lesbian bars. New York City still has 3.
But Manhattan is becoming unlivable for anyone without a $1 trillion income.
Precisely. So younger folks are living in Jersey City, they're living in the far reaches of Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, like they're pushing farther and farther out.
Right.
And the reality is that community then is in a way too diffuse to help support a really local business.
I see.
That's one of the big challenges.
All right, so then you go to San Antonio to a very different setup.
Yes.
The very long-standing Esperanza Peace and Justice Center.
Yep.
And tell us about that and the condition of that.
Yeah, so that, and again, all the spaces that I visited, I heard about from other folks, and this was one that kept coming up in conversation. And it's intriguing because it's a space that you might not initially think of as a queer space, because it serves the Mexican and Mexican American community in San Antonio, in the west side of San Antonio in particular. And it is an organization that embodies a kind of intersectional politic that grew out of queer women of color's politics in the 70s in particular.
Yeah, I think of it as a very 70s, 80s kind of place.
The ethos is, a refusal to be single issue. A refusal to say, oh, I'm just going to focus on this issue, or I'm just going to talk about my Mexican identity or my queer identity or my economic status. They refuse to do that. They're covering the gamut. They're really there for their community. But what's really interesting about the Esperanza is that it's always been led by queer Latinas across its history. Most of the staff identifies that way or identifies as trans. And what they've managed to do over the years is integrate queerness into their existence in a way that it is central to who they are. And in fact, they were defunded because of their very queer programming.
Was that the Bush administration, Reagan administration?
Ooh, I can't remember.
A long time ago, but I remember that fight.
In the 90s.
But they haven't, as you say, they haven't made themselves invisible as queer people.
Absolutely not.
And yet they have thrived within this multicultural or primarily Mexican community.
That's correct,
But speaking of integration, do you think that, I mean, a lot of younger people these days, like, I'd just rather go to a regular space. I mean, I know I have a younger friend, he meets male dates at the local bar. And they meet on the internet, they go there, he doesn't feel like he has to go to a gay bar. They would rather be in integrated spaces with their non-gay friends or mixed. Is that part of what is killing these LGBT spaces?
I think that the way that I look at it in the film is I'm particularly, when we talk about why these spaces have survived, it tends to be that they have a purpose beyond just being an access point for dating and romance, right? Like I'm particularly interested in political work, and I looked for spaces that have a very clear political sort of viewpoint or project that they're engaged in. And so the answer, as we know, lots of people get involved in politics because they see someone who's really cute and they're like, I want to go hang out with that person, or vice versa. That may not be the only reason they go, but certainly that's part of it. But the reason these spaces stick around is because there is a project they're engaged in. So at the Esperanza, it has to do with the political work in the community. At the Wow Cafe Theater, which is part of the documentary, it's doing their arts work and helping to cultivate an arts community. Even in the bar in Oklahoma, which we would think of as a space where people would go to just socialize primarily, the context there makes gathering together even more of a political act. I mean, we know existing in public as a queer person is a political act in certain spaces, and there it very much is. Yeah.
And the archives, the Lesbian Herstory archives in
Yes.
Brooklyn are also a focus of this.
Yep.
And an inspiration for the play that's opening in Minneapolis of yours, Unknown. But talk about the purpose of the archives. You had great affection for the archives in this film, as do we. So tell us about your experience of interacting with them.
I have affection for it because it's one of the first queer spaces that I found myself going to, wanting to be in, where I felt affirmed. You know, I was not necessarily a bar dyke. I came into my queerness in my late 20s, early 30s. I wanted a space where I could, you know, I'm a writer, I'm a little bit of a loner. I wanted a space where I could be who I was. And that was the archives for me. So I have an affection for it because it's a very personal space. But on another level, I, as you pointed out very astutely, queer pilgrimages are very common.
Yes.
I find that they're particularly common with queer women and trans folks, because accessing community and accessing stories is still so challenging for those folks. And I'm sure it's true also for men, but I know the communities that I've interacted with a bit better, and I know that for queer women, it remains a serious challenge.
You know, it's interesting. I got an invitation this week to go to an event that is supposed to be an intergenerational educational event, you know, a social event, but an attempt to bring generations together and to teach younger generations. And I will admit to some impatience with an event like that. And like, you know, come on, don't you know the history and the stories, and why are people so ignorant?
Oh, well, ignorance a little rough.
That's a little
I certainly wouldn't use that word.
Yes.
But I do think that it remains incredibly challenging to access our history.
There are all these movies out there.
Yeah, and are they being distributed? I mean, let's be honest, right? If you do the search on Netflix for lesbian, films like mine are not coming up.
Okay.
Very few films, in fact, are coming up.
And you do integrate some history in here. You've got Phyllis Lyon and the late Del Martin in the film. This is the lesbian couple that founded the Daughters of Bilitis, 1950, well, mid-50s.
Mid-50s, yeah. Yeah. No, it was very important to me to include history for exactly that reason, because I know how hard it is to find these stories. And I think also we don't necessarily get to narrate our own history.
Yes.
And I think it was also really important to me to draw a through line that was inclusive of both the amazing legacy that has been created by queer and trans women over history, but also some of the tensions that have existed across history.
And in fact, one of the most charming things in the film is documenting the trans ladies' picnics that are taking place now. And some of those women have been with us in Reclaim Pride this last year, so I was happy to see that. We have only about 30 seconds.
When can we see you at NewFest?
October 25th at 6 o'clock or October 27th at 4:15 at the center.
That's Friday and Sunday.
Go to newfest.org
for the details. Thank you, Alexis Clements, for joining us. All We've Got is the name of the film. Unknown is the play in Minneapolis. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week here at Gay USA.